Before borders, before flags, before the names written in European tongues, there was Africa. A continent vast as imagination, shaped by rivers older than memory, and mountains that had already seen empires rise and vanish into dust. Across its breadth, from the golden dunes of the Sahara to the green veins of the Congo, the land carried names whispered in languages born from earth, wind, and fire. Names that were not mere labels, but living symbols, echoes of ancestry, geography, divinity, and destiny. These were the names they erased. The camera drifts over a map. Not the colonial one with straight lines and foreign words, but a map of memory. Alkebulan, the mother of mankind. Ethiopia, the land of burnt faces. Kemet, the Black Land. Azania, the land of the South. Names that spoke of belonging and of pride until they were replaced, one by those of empire. But to understand what they meant and what was lost, we must go back, far before colonization. Back to the heart of the continent's story, when people named not to claim, but to remember. In the deep past, the world did not yet call this land Africa. The earliest civilizations along the Nile knew it as Kemet, the Black Land. A word that referred not to the skin of its people, but to the fertile soil that turned dark after the Nile's flood. It was a name of life, of rebirth, of creation itself. And just as the Nile brought fertility to Egypt, it carried language and culture southward, to Nubia, Kush, and Punt, realms that Europeans would one day call mysterious, though their names once rang clear in their own tongues. Further west, long before the word Sudan appeared on maps, the people of the Sahel knew their homeland as Bilad as-Sudan, the land of the black people. It was an Arabic term born from centuries of trade across the Sahara, where Berbers, Arabs, and Africans met under the blazing sun to exchange gold, salt, and stories. Yet even this was not the first name. Older still were the local designations: Ghana, Ouagadougou, Tekrur, kingdoms whose names carried the power of kings and the rhythm of drums that marked the boundaries of ancient realms. In the rainforests of the Congo Basin, there was no single name for the land, for the land itself was sacred. Among the Bantu peoples, each valley, river, and mountain had a name, often tied to a spirit, a legend, or an ancestor. The word Zaire, which later entered European maps, derived from the Congo word Nzere or Nzadi, meaning the river that swallows all rivers. Portese, the Portuguese heard it and wrote it down wrong. Yet even in their mistake, the echo of the true name remained. Names like Ife, Oyo, and Benin once defined the heart of West Africa, cities of art, trade, and knowledge. Before the Iho word Nigeria was ever invented by British cartographers, these names filled the air like music. Ile-Ife, the House of Expansion, was believed to be the birthplace of humanity in Yoruba tradition. Oyo meant power and dominion. Benin, derived from Ubini, reflected the might of a kingdom famed for its bronze and ivory artistry. Southward, the lands we now call Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi once formed part of the Mwene Mutapa Empire, or the Kingdom of the Great Ruler. Europeans who came centuries later twisted it into Monomotapa, but the original word carried divine authority. Even Zimbabwe itself, Zimba Dzamabwe, houses of stone, was not just a name, but a description of majesty carved from granite. Every name in Africa meant something. It told a story. Mali came from the Mandinka word for hippopotamus, an animal sacred to the Niger River. Songhai, from the Gao region, meant people of the riverbank. Azania, an ancient Greek name for the East African coast, possibly came from the local Zan or Zanj, referring to the black people who lived by the sea. From this, the Arabic, Bilad al-Zanj, land of the Zanj, would later give rise to Zanzibar, the coast of the blacks. These names were not arbitrary. They were the poetry of geography. They described the rhythm of rivers, the colors of soil, the winds that carried rain and sand. They captured identity in sound. But time and conquest have long tongues. As empires grew, first Arab, then Ottoman, then European, old names began to vanish beneath new ones. The erasure did not happen in a single stroke, but in layers, as though foreign words were painted over the continent's memory. When the Romans expanded south of the Mediterranean, they used the term Africa, probably derived from the Afri tribe near modern Tunisia. To them, Africa Terra meant land of the Afri. Yet in time, the name came to encompass an entire continent that the Romans never truly knew. To the Berbers, that land was Ifran or Ifriqiya, and from that, through Latin, came Africa. A single misapplied tribal name replaced 1,000 others. Still, long after Rome fell, the people of the continent continued to call their world by names of their own. Medieval Arab geographers spoke of Bilad al-Habasha, the land of the Abyssinians, Takrur, the western Sudan, and Zanj, the eastern coast. Each word carried both description and respect. Even the Greeks before them, when they wrote of Ethiopia, used Ethiopia, the land of the sunburned. To them, it was not an insult, but a geographical truth, the place where the earth met the burning eye of the sun. The story of Africa's names is, in truth, the story of how people understood themselves before outsiders defined them. To call a place by its true name was to know it, and in knowing, to belong. Colonization severed that bond. As the centuries turned, explorers from Portugal, Spain, and later Britain, France, and Germany began to redraw the map. But before they did, they renamed. Rivers became Victoria, mountains Kenya, cities Port Elizabeth, lands Rhodesia. Names of queens and conquerors replaced those of ancestors and kings. The old words faded from memory, preserved only in oral traditions, songs, and the stories of elders who remembered when the world was still named in their own tongue. Yet even as new borders were carved, the old names refused to die. Beneath the modern nations, Africa's ancient map still beats like a hidden heart, each name waiting to be spoken again. To stand on the cliffs of Tangier or the banks of the Niger today is to feel that layered past. Beneath the colonial names written on signs and passports lies a far older geography, one drawn in sound, soil, and spirit. When the light of dusk falls over Timbuktu, when wind sweeps through the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, when fishermen whisper prayers to Mamiwata along the Gulf of Guinea, the old names return. They live in rhythm, not ink. And so begins our journey. Across the erased map of Africa, a continent of names reborn through memory. The wind rises over the Sahel, a long breath of dust and memory crossing the ancient trade routes of the Sahara. Once, this was not a desert of isolation, but a highway of life. Caravans of camels carried gold from the forests of the south, salt from the mines of the north, and ideas from the east to the west. The desert was not a border, but a bridge, and along its edge thrived kingdoms whose names shimmered like mirages in the pages of history. Long before the word Mali appeared in atlases, there was Ouagadougou, the land of the Ghana kings. Ghana was not a place at first. It was a title, meaning war chief or king of gold. The kingdom itself stretched across what? is now Mauritania, Mali, and Senegal, a land where the Niger River bent like a blue serpent through the golden savanna. When Arab chroniclers, such as al-Bakri, wrote about it in the 11th century, they described the land of gold and justice. Its people called it Wagadu, a word tied to the sacred well of Bida, where legend said a serpent spirit brought prosperity in exchange for ritual tribute. The land's name, therefore, meant more than geography. It was a covenant between the people and the divine. As Ghana declined, new names rose on its ashes. Mali emerged under the leadership of Sundiata Keita in the 13th century, and with it, the Mande language gave birth to a new word that would echo across time. Mali means hippopotamus, but within Mande cosmology, the animal symbolized strength and connection to water, the essence of life. The empire's emblem, therefore, was both earthly and spiritual, a kingdom named not after conquest, but after a creature sacred to its people. To the east of Mali stretched Songhai, a civilization centered on the city of Gao. The very name Songhai was ancient, belonging to a people of the river. It meant those who dwell by the bank, for the Niger was their lifeline. Their empire, born in the 15th century, thrived on knowledge and commerce. Timbuktu and Gao became lighthouses of learning, their libraries filled with manuscripts of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. When Europeans arrived centuries later, they could not believe that such cities existed in Africa. They renamed and rewrote, but the people of Songhai remembered. Farther north, beyond the dunes, the Berber and Tuareg peoples had their own ancient designations for the world they traversed. The word Tamazgha referred to the entire Berber homeland, stretching from Morocco's Atlantic coast to the oasis cities of Libya. Amazigh meant free people, and in their tongues it was freedom itself that defined geography. Long before the arrival of Arabic or French, names like Numidia, Mauritania, and Ifriqiya reflected kingdoms that bridged Africa and the Mediterranean. The Romans, encountering the Afri tribe near Carthage, took their name and made it stand for the entire continent. But the Berbers never lost their own. Even today, echoes of those words survive in mountain villages where the ancient tongue still breathes. As the camera drifts eastward, we find ourselves in the highlands of the Horn of Africa, lands known to the Greeks as Ethiopia, the land of the burnt faces, a poetic description of sun-darkened skin beneath an eternal sky. But to its people, it was Habasha, a name that united clans of the Northern Horn. The kingdom that emerged there, Aksum, called itself Agaze or Ethiopia, long before Europe did. In their inscriptions, carved in stone and ge'ez, kings proclaimed dominion from the rising of the sun to the setting of the moon. The name Ethiopia would survive conquests, dynasties, and colonial ambitions. It is one of the few African names that endures from antiquity to modern maps. To the south lay the realm known as Punt, a legendary land described in Egyptian texts as God's land. It was not fantasy, but a network of trading ports along what is now Somalia, Eritrea, and Djibouti. Its name, Puin, meant coast or land of incense. Egyptian ships once sailed there to trade for gold, myrrh, and exotic animals. The people of Punt described themselves not by boundaries, but by connection to the sea. Later, Arabs would call the same region the Zanj Coast, from the local term Zanj, meaning the black people. From it came Zanzibar, a fusion of Zanj and Bar, coast. The old name carried on, reshaped, but not lost. As we move down the eastern shoreline, we meet Azania, a name that appeared in ancient Greek and Roman writings. It referred to the southeastern coast of Africa, roughly modern Kenya and Tanzania. The origin of Azania is uncertain, but many scholars believe it derived from early Cushitic roots, meaning southern land. The name still resonates in South Africa today, reclaimed by poets and activists as a symbol of pre-colonial identity, a way to remember what existed before the name South Africa ever appeared. Inland, the Great Lakes region shimmered like a necklace of blue glass beneath the equatorial sun. Here were kingdoms that named themselves after kings and clans: Buganda, Bunyoro, Rwanda, Karagwe. Each name carried genealogical meaning. Buganda, from Ganda, the people of the Union. Rwanda, from the root Kwanda, to expand. These were not mere boundaries, but expressions of life and growth. Their borders were fluid, like rivers shifting in the rains, and their names evolved with them. To the south, across the plateau, lay Mutapa, whose rulers called themselves Mwene Mutapa, the Lord of the plundered lands, or the Great Conqueror. Europeans, mishearing the term, wrote Monomotapa and filled it with legend. But in its original form, it described a sacred kingship that linked heaven and earth. From Mutapa came Zimbabwe, a word from the Shona Dzimba Dzamabwe, houses of stone. It referred to the towering stone ruins that stood at the heart of a vast kingdom. To name something in Shona was to sanctify it. And the stones of Great Zimbabwe still echo the hum of that old language. In the forests of Central Africa, the Congo Kingdom rose around the mouth of the Great River. Congo itself came from Nkongo, hunter or assembly, suggesting both unity and survival. The river's local name, Nzadi o Nzere, the river that swallows all rivers, was misunderstood by Portuguese sailors, who wrote it as Zaire. Thus, a colonial mishearing became a national name centuries later, though the river's true title remained in the songs of its people. To the west, the forest kingdoms of the Niger Delta, Benin, Wari, Oyo, thrived in a world of art and ritual. Benin came from Ubini, the people of harmony. When the British attacked the Benin Kingdom in 1897, they burned a civilization older than their empire. Yet the name survived through its bronzes, faces that stared defiantly from the flames. Oyo, the capital of a powerful Yoruba empire, meant vigor and leadership. If, the sacred city of origin, meant expansion or spreading, for it was believed to be where the world began. These names were blueprints of philosophy, written not in books, but in memory. Across the Gulf of Guinea, in the lands that became Cameroon, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea, the earliest names came from the rivers themselves. Rio dos Camarões, River of Prawns, was the name given by Portuguese explorers who misunderstood the Douala people's word, wuri. Yet before that, local traditions referred to the same waters as Mungo or Mbappe after deities of fertility and abundance. Colonization, once again, replaced sacred associations with simple observation. Names were not only about kings and rivers, they were about belonging. In North Africa, the name Kemet had given way to Misr in Arabic, meaning fortified land. From Misr came Masr, the name Egyptians still use for their country today. Westward, Ifriqiya became Tunisia. Numidia became Algeria. Tamart en Lekbail, land of the Kabyle, was renamed in French script. The colonial languages carved a new topography, but beneath them, the old names persisted in poetry and speech. To the southwest, in lands once known as Namib, meaning vast place of nothingness, the desert itself named the nation that would later emerge. The same is true for Kalahari, from the Tswana word Gala, the great thirst. Even where there was emptiness, Africans found meaning. In every region, The original names were intertwined with language and spirituality. A word for a mountain might also mean ancestor. A name for a river might also mean renewal. Geography was sacred text, but when colonization came, that sanctity was systematically erased. From 1884 to 1885, at the Berlin Conference, European powers divided Africa with rulers and pens. No African voices were present. Kingdoms that had lasted for centuries vanished overnight into European nomenclature. Basutoland became Lesotho. Bechuanaland became Botswana. Gold Coast became Ghana. Upper Volta became Burkina Faso. The irony was that even in renaming, the new nations sometimes looked back to their roots, reviving the buried meanings of the past. Ghana was reborn in 1957 as the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence. Kwame Nkrumah chose the name deliberately to honor the old empire of gold and justice that once united the Sahel. Mali followed in 1960, resurrecting the word of the river people. Zimbabwe restored the Shona houses of stone. Across the continent, history began to heal itself through names. For every nation, reclaiming its name became an act of liberation. Burkina Faso means land of upright people. Eritrea comes from Erythraean Sea, an ancient Greek term for the Red Sea, reappropriated by the modern state. Ethiopia reasserted its biblical and royal heritage. Even South Africa's hidden name, Azania, remains a dream spoken by those who wish to see the land restored to its original dignity. Yet still, many erased names remain buried under colonial vocabulary. Modern Africa is filled with languages, more than 2,000 tongues, but the names on global maps rarely reflect that living diversity. Each name replaced by another tells a story of loss, but also of resilience. Because every time someone says Kemet instead of Egypt, or Alkebulan instead of Africa, they whisper defiance against forgetfulness. The past, after all, cannot be erased, only hidden beneath layers of ink. Across the equatorial forests and the grasslands of the interior, new realms began to rise, vast, intricate societies that would define Africa's middle centuries. Their names, now echoes beneath colonial maps, once carried deep meaning, symbols of rivers, ancestors, and gods that watched over their lands. In the heart of the Sahel, where golden dust mingled with the pulse of the Niger River, lay the empire of Ghana. Not the nation we know today, but a kingdom older and grander, founded by the Soninka people around the 4th century. They called their land Ouagadougou, the land of herds, and its rulers bore the title Ghana, meaning war chief. The name of the king became the name of the empire itself, a mark of respect that European chroniclers later confused for geography. Through Ouagadougou's hands flowed gold, salt, and the commerce of continents, its capital Kumbi. Salé, a glittering crossroad where North African merchants traded silks and copper for West Africa's wealth. Further, east rose Mali, born from the Mandinka clans who overthrew Ghana's decline. Mali meant the place where the king lives, and from that name would spring a civilization so luminous that it drew envy and awe from across the known world. Under Mansa Musa, the King of Kings, the empire's caravans stretched to the horizon, laden with gold dust and manuscripts bound in leather. The world remembers his pilgrimage to Mecca, but what was erased was the meaning behind his homeland's name. Mali, the hearth of kingship, the center of dignity and creation. To the north, beyond the dunes and wind-sculpted ridges of the Sahara, another power ruled, the Songhai Empire. From the banks of the Niger near Gao, they rose to inherit Mali's mantle. Their name, Songhai, came from the ancient Za dynasty, and it spoke of those who dwell by the river. Their empire, reaching from the Atlantic to the fringes of Lake Chad, became one of the largest in African history. Yet today, the map bears the foreign geometry of borders carved by France, splitting the Niger from Mali, severing the old river's unity, across the dense forests of the Gulf of Guinea, where the canopy breathes like a living ocean. The Akan people forged the Ashanti kingdom, Asante, because of war. It was not a name of conquest, but of resistance, born from the unity of clans who stood together against invaders. Their golden stool, carved from celestial wood, symbolized the soul of their nation. When the British demanded to sit upon it, the Ashanti refused, for in their language, Asante meant more than power. It meant the spirit of a people that could not be bought. In the basin of the Congo, where the river curves like a serpent of silver, stood the Kingdom of Congo, Congo Dia Ntotila, the realm of the king. Its people called themselves Bakongo, meaning those who hunt together. Their capital, Mbanza Congo, shone with carved palaces and plazas paved in white stone. Long before European contact, Congo was a realm of laws, music, and diplomacy, its name rooted in kinship and order. But Portuguese chroniclers, unable to pronounce its tones, turned Congo into Congo, and from that era, two colonial nations were born, a division that the map still bears today. Further south, the grasslands of Great Zimbabwe rose in silence. Granite walls fitted without mortar, towers glinting in the sun. Its name meant houses of stone, Zimba Dzamabwe, a phrase of reverence, not ruin. For centuries, Europeans denied that Africans could have built such marvels, attributing them falsely to outsiders. But Great Zimbabwe was African, entirely and proudly so. A city that once commanded the gold routes between the interior and the Indian Ocean. Its very name became a symbol of endurance, reborn in the modern nation that took its name in 1980, restoring pride to a memory nearly erased. Along the eastern coast, the winds of the Indian Ocean carried the songs of the Swahili world. Swahili, from the Arabic Sawahil, people of the coast. Yet long before Arabic influence, the people of Kilwa, Mombasa, and Lamu called their towns by words of their own, Shirazi, Umvita, Unguja, names of coral and tide. These city-states were not isolated outposts, but a network of scholars, poets, and merchants trading ivory, gold, and ideas from China to Persia. Their language, Swahili, became a bridge between worlds, an African oceanic tongue that refused to vanish. Deep in the Horn of Africa, the kingdom of Aksum had once reigned supreme, its obelisks rising from the earth like fingers of granite prayer. The name Aksum is ancient, perhaps meaning the water of the chief, though even its roots are veiled in time. It was from here that the legend of the Queen of Sheba emerged, and from here that Christianity took root long before Europe embraced it. The highlands around it bore other names: Tigray, Habesha, Ethiopia, the last meaning the land of burnt faces, a term of identity that the people reclaimed with pride, turning an outsider's description into a symbol of sovereignty. On the southern plains, among the Zulu and Xhosa, words carried the power of thunder. Zulu meant heaven, a name given to a people who traced their origin to the sky. Xhosa likely meant fierce, a name born from the winds of resistance. When British and Dutch colonists came, they renamed their lands with European words: Natal, Cape, Orange, washing away the living meanings beneath. Yet the old names survived in the songs of the people, whispered through the valleys like seeds waiting for rain. To the west, in the lands of present-day Nigeria, kingdoms flourished with names that spoke of order and divinity. Yoruba traditions remembered Oyo, meaning the capital of the world, a city where kings ruled from thrones of brass, and where the rhythm of talking drums carried commands across miles. In the north stood the Hausa city-states, Kano, Katsina, Zaria, each a jewel of learning and trade. Their name, Hausa, came from a single word: speech. It meant those who shared a tongue, a reminder that culture, not conquest, defined them. Further inland, among the Bini people, the kingdom of Benin rose in majesty, not to be confused with the modern state that bears its name. The old Edo kingdom, as it was called, had walls that stretched longer than the Great Wall of China. Its capital, Edo, meant home, the sacred center of the world. When the British burned it in 1897, they carried away its bronzes, but they could not carry away the meaning of Edo, the home that no fire could erase. The continent was a mosaic of languages, kingdoms, and meanings, a living dictionary of identity. Yet, as the 15th century dawned, sails began to appear on the western horizon. The world that had named itself in rivers and suns would soon face the ink of others, a cartographic conquest that would rename not just the land, but the soul. The horizon darkened with sails of white canvas and wooden masts that cut against the dawn. From the 15th century onward, the world changed shape not by earthquakes or the movement of stars, but by the movement of men, explorers, traders, missionaries, and empires armed with ink, compasses, and greed. Africa, once the heart of its own stories, was about to be rewritten in foreign tongues. The Portuguese were the first to trace its coasts, inch by inch, cape by cape, renaming what had already been named. To them, the Western Bulge became the Guinea Coast, a vague word that Europeans used to describe all black-skinned peoples. The rivers that Africans had called Senegal, Gambia, and Benue were recorded anew in Latin alphabets, their native meanings diluted or lost. Where kingdoms once stood, Ouagadougou, Oyo, Congo, the map filled instead with European guesses, mistakes, and foreign patronyms. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the storm-swept tip of the continent. The local Khoisan called the land Hue Gaeb, the place where clouds gather. Diaz, shaken by the tempests, named it Cabo das Tormentas, the Cape of Storms. King John II of Portugal later changed it to the Cape of Good Hope, a name of optimism for trade routes, not for the people who lived there. Thus began the habit of renaming Africa not by its truth, but by European ambition. As Vasco da Gama sailed further east toward India, the Swahili cities he encountered were already rich with identity. Kilwa Kisiwani, Mombasa, Malindi. Yet, Portuguese chroniclers flattened them into categories. The Arab towns of the coast. Their real names, words of coral, poetry, and lineage, were filed under European maps as curiosities. The map no longer spoke of kinship or the land's memory. It spoke of possession. In North Africa, the ancient names that had once sung through the sands, Numidia, Mauritania, Carthage, gave way to colonial provinces. When the French arrived centuries later, they drew new lines over Algeria and Tunisia, importing their language and administration. Arabic names like Aljazair, meaning the islands, and Tunis, meaning to rest, became the formal titles of states only under foreign eyes. The Dutch came next, settling along the southern coasts in the 17th century. They built Kaapstad, Cape Town, on land the Khoikhoi had known as Hue Gaeb and later Camisa, the place of sweet waters. To the Dutch, Africa became a frontier, not a homeland. They called themselves Boers, farmers, and the land Zuid-Afrika, South Africa, a name of direction rather than belonging. Where ancient clans had marked territories by rivers and herds, colonial cartographers marked them by lines and longitude. The 19th century brought the final act, the scramble for Africa. In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin to divide the continent, not by understanding its nations, but by negotiating their own ambitions. No African voice was invited. Maps were spread across oak tables, and with ruler and pen, borders were carved like wounds through tribes and kingdoms. Names such as Benin, Uganda, Ashanti, Sokoto, and Bunyoro were overwritten by new colonial labels: British Gold Coast, German East Africa, French West Africa, Belgian Congo. In Central Africa, the most infamous of these renamings took place. King Leopold II of Belgium declared the Congo Basin his private property, calling it the Congo Free State. The irony was obscene. The name Free concealed one of history's graffiti, darkest crimes: forced labor, severed hands, and millions dead. The native word Nzadi, from which the river's name derived, meaning the great river that swallows all rivers, was replaced by the European shorthand Congo, itself a distortion of Congo, the ancient kingdom's name. To the west, Senegambia, a region defined by the mingling of rivers and peoples, was carved apart. The name Senegal comes from Sunugal, a Wolof phrase meaning "our canoe," a symbol of unity. Yet French map makers recorded it as Senegal, a colonial department. Across the river, the Mandinka word Gambia was kept, but stripped of its native spelling and purpose, now a British enclave carved by a single river. In East Africa, the German Empire took Tanganyika, from Tanganyika, meaning the Great Lake spreading like a plain. It was later merged into German East Africa, and, after the First World War, the British fused it with Zanzibar, creating Tanzania, a hybrid of names, an echo of identities once distinct yet resilient. Northward, the Nile carried a 1,000-year story. The lands the Nubians had called Tasseti and Kush became Sudan. From the Arabic Bilad al-Sudan, the land of the blacks. Egypt itself kept its ancient echo. Mizr, from the Old Semitic, root for civilization, endured even as Greeks had called it Aegyptos and the British Egypt. It was one of the few ancient names to survive colonization intact, though its sovereignty was not. Further south, Rhodesia emerged on the map, a name without origin in African tongues. It honored Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist whose dream of dominion stretched from Cape to Cairo. The land of Zimbabwe, houses of stone, became Southern Rhodesia. The north, Northern Rhodesia. The names of empires replaced the names of ancestors. Only in 1980 did the people reclaim their true name, Zimbabwe. In 1964, Zambia did the same, taking its name from the Zambezi River, itself from the Tonga word Yambeji, the River of Gods. In the west, Dahomey, a proud fawn kingdom, carried a name meaning "on the belly of Dan," an ancestral figure. But in 1975, after independence, it was renamed Benin, after the ancient kingdom whose borders lay far to the east, a symbol of Pan-African identity, but also of how colonial borders blurred memory. The names were shifting not because of tradition, but because of survival. The act of reclaiming identity from maps that had erased it. Further north, Upper Volta became Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Gold Coast became Ghana, reviving the name of the ancient empire that once ruled the Sahel. French Sudan became Mali, restoring a title of royal splendor. Bechuanaland became Botswana, the land of the Tswana. Nyasaland, from a colonial distortion of Nyanja, lake, became Malawi. Each reclaimed name was a resurrection, a whisper of history, returning to its rightful tongue. The map was being rewritten once more, not by empire, but by remembrance. The colonial centuries had not only taken land, they had taken meaning. Mountains once called Kilimanjaro, the Shining Mountain, were renamed and misrecorded. Rivers, plains, and deserts lost their ancestral words. But in every market, in every story, the old names endured like embers beneath ash, waiting for the wind of freedom to breathe them back to life. When independence came, it was not only a political act but a linguistic one, a reclamation of memory. The people of Africa began to rename their capitals, their mountains, their currencies. What had once been Leopoldville became Kinshasa. From Kinshasa, the name of a fishing village that stood there before colonial conquest. Salisbury became Harare, from Harari, the one who does not sleep. Lourenço Marques became Maputo, after a Tsonga chief who lived before the Portuguese arrived. It was as though the continent, long silenced, was speaking its own language again, syllable by syllable, reclaiming the poetry of its geography. Names are more than words. They are coordinates of memory. Each carries the weight of ancestors, the sound of rivers, the rhythm of languages that mapped the land long before compasses were drawn. The act of naming, once stolen, was now sacred, an unbroken lineage between past and future. And yet, beneath the modern names of nations and borders, the older words still live, whispered by elders, carved in rituals, sung in lullabies. The world map may show Africa, a name the Romans once used for a single province, Ifriqiya. But to those who belong to it, the continent remains 1,000 living names: Kemet, Kush, Aksum, Zamani, Edo, Ashanti, Congo, Swahili, Zulu, Timbuktu, Benin, Mali. The 20th century brought with it a quiet revolution, not just in governments or flags, but in meaning itself. Across the continent, a new generation of African leaders, historians, and poets sought to peel back the layers of foreign ink that had obscured their lands for centuries. They understood that maps were never neutral. Every name carried an agenda, every line a story. And so, they began the slow and sacred task of renaming, of restoring the truth that colonial cartographers had tried to bury. In the markets of Accra, the air shimmered with the smell of roasted maize and sea breeze. It was 1957, and Ghana was being reborn. The Gold Coast, a name given by Europeans for what they desired, was cast aside. In its place rose the name Ghana, echo of an empire that had ruled the Sahel 1,000 years before. To say Ghana was to invoke a legacy of kings, of caravans that crossed the Sahara carrying gold and salt, of scholars and griots who preserved the rhythm of knowledge. For the first time in modern history, an African nation reclaimed not only its land, but its story. Others followed. Mali rose from the shadow of French Sudan, recalling the empire that had once flourished under Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca had reshaped the world's understanding of wealth and faith. Upper Volta, named by colonial officers after a river system, became Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Bechuanaland became Botswana. Nyasaland became Malawi. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe and Zambia. Each renaming was a rebirth, a return to roots older than empire, older even than the printed map itself. But this restoration was not simple. Many names had been lost entirely, erased from collective memory by generations of foreign rule, missionary schooling, and administrative decree. To recover them required archaeology of language. Linguists and historians scoured oral traditions, comparing words from ancestral tongues, Bantu, Nilotic, Berber, Cushitic, searching for the meanings behind rivers, mountains, and villages. Every rediscovered name was like uncovering an ancient inscription, proof that memory had survived the storm. In the highlands of Ethiopia, names had never truly died. Habasha, Aksum, Tigray, Amhara, words that carried the cadence of empire and faith, endured through centuries of resistance. Ethiopia had never been colonized in the European sense, and its language, Ge'ez, preserved some of Africa's oldest recorded words. Its capital, Addis Ababa, New Flower, bloomed in its own script, its own time. In this land, the past had not been erased. It had adapted, living side by side with the modern. In North Africa, the movement of revival took a different form. The Berber-speaking peoples, or Amazigh, began reclaiming names that long predated Arab and colonial designations. Mountains like Adrar, Tazagart, and Tamazgha regained their native resonance. Towns began restoring Amazigh signs alongside Arabic and French, acknowledging a linguistic and cultural depth that had survived under the surface for millennia. It was a quiet defiance, the recognition that Africa's oldest names were not lost, merely waiting to be spoken again. Further west, scholars turned their gaze to the forgotten libraries of Timbuktu. There, in the dry desert air, manuscripts written in Arabic, Soninka, and Fulani revealed names of places, lineages, and kingdoms that had vanished from modern maps. One scroll described Gao as the city of the Niger. Another referenced Takrur, an ancient polity whose people had once traded salt and gold across the desert. These manuscripts proved that Africa had mapped itself long before the arrival of colonial surveyors, not with compasses and coordinates, but with trade routes, songs, and oral genealogy. In the Congo Basin, oral historians remembered names that had been hidden beneath missionary and colonial designations. The Congo Kingdom, which had once stretched from the Atlantic into the heart of the forest, had recorded its capital as Mbanza Congo. Europeans renamed it São Salvador. When the Democratic Republic of Congo reclaimed independence, one of its first acts was to restore that name. Mbanza Congo returned to maps, and so did the dignity of memory. To understand these restorations is to understand that African geography was always human geography, tied to ancestry, language, and the living earth. The name Zambezi carried the spirit of the river's roar. Kilimanjaro, from Kilimanjaro, the shining mountain, glowed with the same snowcaps seen by ancient Chaga peoples long before European climbers sought to claim it. Sahara itself came from the Arabic Sahara, desert, but before that, the Berbers had called it Tineri, the Sea of Nothingness. In southern Africa, the reclamation continued through oral history. The name Lesotho replaced Basutoland, reaffirming the land of the Sotho. Swaziland became Eswatini, land of the Swazi. In Namibia, the dunes of Namib gave their name to the nation itself, drawn from a Nama word meaning vast place. These were not political choices alone. They were acts of spiritual and historical justice, the restoration of words to their rightful soil. But some wounds of naming remained raw. The word Africa itself, where had it come from? Historians traced it to Ifriqiya, the Roman name for their province in present-day Tunisia, derived from the Berber word Afri, meaning people of the land. Others suggested Phoenician, Egyptian, or even Greco-Latin roots. Whatever its origin, the name had grown into something vast, a continent's identity that transcended etymology. In reclaiming the word Africa, its people turned what was once an outsider's label into a symbol of unity and pride. The process of decolonizing geography extended beyond nations. Rivers, towns, and landmarks were renamed to honor freedom fighters and thinkers. Streets, once bearing colonial generals, became avenues of poets, martyrs, and revolutionaries. Schools taught children to pronounce Harare instead of Salisbury, Kinshasa instead of Leopoldville, Dodoma instead of Tanganyika's capital. Every corrected word was a lesson in sovereignty. And still, deeper questions arose. Could a name truly capture all that had been lost? Could it carry the memory of erased languages, burned archives, and broken lineages? Perhaps not entirely, but in every restored syllable was a spark, a testament that history could not be silenced forever. Across Africa's vast landscapes, the map itself seemed to breathe again. The deserts of Niger glowed under stars whose constellations had guided Tuareg caravans for centuries. The rainforests of the Congo whispered names of spirits and rivers known long before colonial boundaries were drawn. The coasts of Senegal, once called Senegal, our canoe, reflected the shimmer of renewal. Today, when travelers cross the continent, they speak words that echo millennia of memory. Addis Ababa, Kano, Lagos, Maputo, Lusaka, Kigali, Accra, Khartoum. Each name, ancient or reclaimed, tells the story of survival. Beneath every modern skyline lies an older one, invisible but eternal, a city of words, reborn. The story of African names is not only about what was erased, but about what endured. It is about rivers that refused to forget their source, about people who carried language in their hearts when it was forbidden to their tongues. It is about how, even when drawn by others, the map of Africa never stopped belonging to itself. And so, when we look at today's world map, with its borders and labels neatly arranged, we must remember that beneath each name lies another, older name, one that speaks of ancestors, rivers, spirits, and suns. The reclamation continues still, in classrooms, in villages, in songs. Every time a child learns that Zimbabwe means house of stone, or that Mali means the place where the king resides, or that Sudan once meant the land of the black, the erasures fade a little more. This is the quiet triumph of memory, that even after centuries of conquest, the land still remembers what it was called. The rivers still flow by their ancient names in the minds of those who walk their banks. And the people, no matter how often history tried to rename them, still know who they are.